Welcome to this explainer. Let's start by questioning the most fundamental assumption you probably have about reality, logic, and math. Think about the simplest equation you know, 1 plus 1 equals 2. I mean, it feels absolutely universally true, right? Unshakable, unchangeable, but what if it actually isn't?
Okay, let's just dive right into this, because I want you to imagine an alternate authored reality with a totally different underlying grammar. In that reality, 1 plus 1 could literally equal 3. Or, I don't know, a color, or even a letter like X. Imagine a universe where geometry actually smells like purple. And the crazy part? It would be entirely mathematically flawless within that specific system.
So, to understand how that is even mathematically and philosophically possible, today we're exploring a seriously fascinating text known as the ADI Framework Manuscript. Let me tell you, this is a mind-bending metaphysical journey. It maps out the exact relationship between created structural realities, like the universe we live in right now, and the uncreated divine. It's an absolute deep dive into how math, logic, and reality itself are actually constructed.
Here's our roadmap for today's ascent. We're going to cover rethinking mathematical truth, the structure of creation, the describability ceiling, transfiguration and miracles, the uncreated divine domain, and finally, the ultimate operator. All right, let's start climbing.
Okay, so jumping into our first point, rethinking mathematical truth and fine-tuning the rules of reality.
Let's start with our own familiar world and look at how our mathematical rules act, well, very much like fine-tuned software. The framework calls our specific reality Domain D. This is just the ordinary structured world where we experience everyday physical causality and human language. So here, 1 plus 1 equals 2 precisely because our domain is specifically coded to support stable units and repeated addition. The math works perfectly, sure, but it works perfectly because it matches the specific grammar of our domain.
And this brilliantly illustrates what's called Theorem 2 mathematical contingency. If you look at the equation, m sub I equals phi of d sub I. It really just means that any mathematical truth is just a function of the specific domain it operates inside. Basically, math isn't some independent, sovereign master just hovering over reality. Nope, it's structurally reliant on its domain. If the reality structure changes, the math changes right along with it.
Which brings us to the structure of creation, or the authored code of reality. See, if math is really just localized software, we absolutely need to understand the fundamental difference between the code and the coder. Just look at the total contrast here. On one side, you've got all created structure, literally everything that can be modified or measured. But on the other side, you have the uncreated divine reality, what the framework calls Domain G. The really crucial asymmetry here: creation can be completely rewritten, while the divine is uncreated, non-contingent, and never ever transfigured.
But what if we zoom out a bit? The framework introduces this idea of meta-D. You can think of these as massive structural extensions of our reality, kind of like entirely different video game engines with completely unimaginable physics. But, and here's the catch, no matter how wild or alien the simulation is, higher abstraction does not equal an escape. Bottom line, if it has a structure, it is still just a created thing.
This hierarchy equation right here is basically our map for today. Notice how it scales upward. We start down at D, which is our tiny, familiar subset of reality, and then we move up through alternate dimensions, scaling all the way toward G. It really goes to show that our universe is just a tiny fraction of this mind-expanding hierarchy of existence.
Now let's talk about the describability ceiling and scaling the absolute limits of creation.
So you might be wondering, how does all this build as we scale to the absolute maximum limits of what can possibly be described? Imagine you're taking an elevator to the absolute top of existence. We ascend from everyday physics in step 1, we punch right through those alternate structures in step 2, we reach the maximum expressive language of those domains in step 3, until finally, bam, we smash into a hard barrier in step 4.
That barrier is the CDC, or the Created Describability Ceiling. It's the ultimate conceptual boundary of literally anything with a structure. And look, this ceiling is so breathtakingly vast, it includes the heavens, completely alien logics, and literally every single thought or object that could ever conceptually exist. To put it simply, if it can be described, it is trapped under this roof.
Yet if you look at the subset equation, C is a subset of G. What does that mean? Well, no matter how unimaginably vast this ceiling gets, it is still entirely mathematically and ontologically contained. All created describability, that total set C,
rests entirely inside G, the divine. Creation, as vast as it is, has a hard limit.
Moving right along, let's explore transfiguration and miracles, or how the grammar itself gets reauthored.
Okay, so if everything describable is really just structured code, what happens when the author actually rewrites it? Well, enter the nonlinear transfiguration principle. In our everyday world, a transformation is just a sequential change, right? Like burning a piece of wood to get ash. But a transfiguration, that alters the very system that defines the thing. An object can be transfigured into a law. It's literally like reaching into the code of a video game and turning a physical sword into the actual concept of gravity. It completely alters the grammar of identity itself.
So, a miracle isn't just some chaotic violation of science. According to Theorem 9, it's a localized, suprastructural reauthoring of reality's grammar. I mean, to us down here inside Domain D, it definitely looks like physics just broke. But from Domain G, it's just the author rewriting a localized line of code. It perfectly proves that our domain is absolutely not self-sovereign.
This perfectly sets up our next focus, the uncreated divine domain, a reality beyond all structure.
We've essentially scaled the ceiling of creation. Now we're crossing that ultimate boundary into Domain G, leaving all created structures entirely behind. And it is incredibly important to grasp this next point. Domain G is not just a bigger mathematical space or some supreme top-level simulation layer. No, it is the uncreated divine domain. It ontologically sustains literally everything we've talked about so far, but without being subject to a single one of those structural rules itself.
And that brings us to Theorem 6, divine containment. See that simple subset symbol? It actually signifies something deeply profound. It means creation doesn't just sit next to God. It relies completely on a law for its existence, its continuity, and its intelligibility. God doesn't merely exist. God contains the very possibility of structure itself.
And finally, let's look at the ultimate operator, which takes us right to the boundary of human comprehension.
As we reach the absolute upper boundary of this entire framework, you have to wonder, how does a created mind even interact with this? Well, Theorem 7 states that humans know the direction of divine greatness, but only Allah knows the actual value. Since we're created beings, locked safely under that ceiling, we can point our cognitive compass toward the direction of the divine. But its exact intrinsic reality, that's known only by the divine. We can map the border, sure, but we cannot cross it.
This actually perfectly explains Theorem 10, which reveals that the phrase Allahu Akbar functions as both a mathematical axiom and an operator. As an axiom, it establishes right off the bat that God is greater than every created reality. But as an operator, it applies recursively. This means no matter how incredibly grand of a mathematical limit creation attempts to generate, this operator instantly outpaces it. God is always, always greater than the very system we just mapped out.
This whole framework just completely reorients how we view logic, math, and the universe itself. The stability of our reality isn't something that's self-owned. It's something that is sustained. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a final, profound question to ponder. If every single thing you can describe, calculate, or even imagine is nothing more than structurally contingent, created code, what truly lies beyond your ceiling? Thanks so much for exploring the ADI framework with me today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.